Hi everybody, welcome to the Digital Care Hub. Have we got people? I've only got five plus plus. Oh, no. Hi everybody, you're in the right place for the Digital Care Hub and Charity Digital webinar. We're just letting the numbers creep up slowly. And then we'll get going in a few minutes. Okay, we'll just give it one more minute to see if we get any more coming through. Okay, it's 2:03 now, so I'm going to get started. I'm sure a few more might trickle through. So welcome, thank you for joining us today. We're joined by Charity Digital, who with ourselves, Digital Care Hub, are presenting to you our webinar, Would You Survive an Email Attack and Are Your Email Domains Ready? Really, really current, I think, with what's going on. So next slide, please. So just a little bit of housekeeping for me. I'm Eleanor from Digital Care Hub, so I'll just be monitoring the question and answer functions. So this is a blind webinar, so we can't see any of your faces. You can just see the hosts that are up now. So any questions you have, please put them on the Q&A. I'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the webinar and can answer them or put them to the hosts and put them to the speakers to come back to you, and we can speak about anything live as well. So you will get access to the recording and the presentation afterwards. And yes, you are on mute, so we can't see or hear any of you. Next slide, please. So just to run through the agenda, so just the intros from me, and then Joel from Charity Digital will be starting us off talking about, are your email domains ready? Are they safe? And then Dan O'Shaughnessy from Digital Care Hub, the head of program delivery, will be taking over to talk you through the business continuity planning and the resources and support that we can help you with that. Then at the end, we have a chance to moderated Q&A, but like I said, if the questions come in throughout, please put them up. There'll be a chance after Joel's slides to answer questions for him, and the same with Dan. If we go slightly under timing, then I'm sure everyone will be grateful to have a few minutes back. It'll be a maximum of an hour and a half, so it won't go over that. All right, next slide, please. Over to you, Joel.
Thank you very much, Eleanor, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Digital Care Hub for having me join today. I'm really looking forward to participating in this session. Hope to learn a few things myself from the other session as well, and perhaps I tend to find with other Q&As as well that I participate in that usually there's someone in the room that helps me learn something as well. There are really good ways to sort of really good communities within these types of Q&As to help us all learn as well. So cybersecurity is obviously one of the main themes for this group. So I did think hard about what I could speak about that possibly hasn't been covered, or perhaps in a bit hasn't been covered in further detail. I'm sure we've all gone through the different levels of, the threats that are out there, and I wanted to stand out a little bit. And having worked with cybersecurity for charities for a good few years now, I feel that a critical aspect of cybersecurity that is often overlooked is the importance of using a professional email domain. A professional email domain can not only help you identify a potential cyber attack, but they also bring the element of credibility and professionalism to your charity, your group, or your brand. So my name is Joel Hogan. I'm the Customer Success Manager at Charity Digital, and for over 7 years now, I've been providing support to charities in a number of ways, from frontline support to delivering consultations, webinars like today, focus groups. So today, let's take a look at the importance of professional email domains. Next slide, please. So yeah, just a brief agenda there. I'll keep on time as best I can. So we're going to firstly talk about what is an email domain, just to keep it simple, just so we're all on the same page. Professional versus generic. So what is the difference between those email domain types? We're going to take a good look at some of the risks of using generic email domains, the benefits of professional email domains to your group, and the best practices for professional email domains. And finally, at the end, just before any sort of potential Q&A, just a little bit of story time to bring some of my own sort of experience, just to maybe sort of round things off nicely. So yeah, without further ado, next slide, please. So to ensure what I speak about today can connect with everyone attending with various skill sets and backgrounds, I just wanted to just start off with a very basic explanation of what an email domain is, starting with this definition that you can see on screen there today. So an email domain is the part of an email address that comes after the @ symbol. Next slide, please. So the structure of an email domain usually consists of two parts. So it's the second level domain, or SLD. This is the name after the @ symbol. And then the top level domain, which is the TLD. This is the suffix. So this could be .com, .org, .co.uk. And more recently, you might start seeing other suffixes now, like, for example, .charity or .giving. I started making appearances as well. So the domain is essential for identifying where an email originates from. This particular slide here, maybe you won't have to do a deep dive yourself into second level domains and top level domains in terms of definitions, but it's just a bit of information there just to get you started. Next slide, please. So let's clarify the difference between professional and generic domains. Now, professional domains, also known as custom domains, and in some areas as well. So professional and custom domains are the same thing. They would represent your own organization, your charity, your brand, something like that. So anything like for example, @digitalcarehub.org would be a professional or custom domain. Generic email domains, now these tend to include free services such as gmail.com, hotmail.com. I'm sure everyone here probably has one, but for themselves personally, as they are free, and they're generally easy to set up as well. Now, whilst generic email domains are widely used, they lack authority and a professional image that a custom domain provides. Now, although I have touched on phrases such as brand and image, which I will come back to, the difference between a professional domain and generic email domain is crucial to cybersecurity. Next slide, please. Thank you. So using a generic email domain for business or charitable purposes, or volunteering purposes, for those in the group today, introduces several cybersecurity risks. Now, generic email domains are often less secure and more vulnerable to various forms of cyber attacks. So we've got the list in front of you there, which I'm going to go break down. So we'll start off number one, so impersonation. So cyber criminals can easily create email addresses that mimic legitimate businesses or your charities using generic domains. So for instance, they might create an email like trustee123@gmail.com. I'm just making up on the spot here, but something like that, something that it's the purpose of this impersonation is to trick recipients into believing it's a trusted communication between someone within your organization. This tactic is commonly used in phishing attacks. Now, phishing attacks, attackers send fraudulent emails pretending to be from your organization, your charity, your group, and their aim is to steal sensitive information. This could be login credentials, financial data, or personal information in general. That tends to be the main goal with phishing attacks. Now, social engineering attackers may exploit the familiarity of generic domains to craft convincing emails to deceive victims into providing sensitive information. So essentially, social engineering may not always necessarily come with a malicious link straight away. That comes with general phishing attacks. This could be someone convincing you, this could be a cyber criminal convincing you to do some sort of task for them whilst posing as someone of authority that's in your group, which I'll circle back round to an example of this later on. So on to weak security standards. Now, generic email services often don't enforce robust security features like domain-based message authentication, reporting and conformance, sender policy framework, or domain keys identified may or DKIM, it's shortened down to. These are critical in preventing email spoofing and ensuring email authenticity. Now, spoofing, without proper authentication mechanisms, attackers can spoof your email address. So what that means is that it's making it look like emails are coming from your domain when they're actually from a malicious source. So people can spoof the actual professional email domain as well. Now, no control over server security. With generic email providers, you have limited control over the security of your email infrastructure. You're also dependent on the provider to ensure that their servers are secure and that the communication channels are also protected as well. You're leaving it more in their hands rather than something like yourselves, or if you have an IT person, can have full control over or monitor correctly. There's limited customization and monitoring, so similar. So companies cannot enforce organization-wide security protocols such as two-factor authentication. I'm sure we've all, hopefully, we're all using a form of that these days, even though it can be a bit can block us what we do at times, but it is very important. Can also enforce other things like data encryption, which I imagine a lot of people are looking to implement in this type of sector, the people who use the Digital Care Hub. So yeah, data encryption across all users when using a generic email domain isn't possible. Leaving your business or charity vulnerable to account takeovers or data leaks. Now, charities using generic email domains don't have advanced monitoring and logging capabilities to track suspicious email activities. So if a breach occurs, it may go unnoticed until significant damage is done. With account recovery, if a generic email account is compromised, recovery may be difficult and perhaps time-consuming and long as well, as you're relying on the provider's customer service and support rather than having internal control of and helping you identify and contain any sort of cyber security attacks related to your generic email domain as well. So you're relying on the services of others. I'm sure we've all worked with, at some point, have had to communicate with larger organizations which maybe don't have the quickest customer responses team as well. So yeah, that's something to look out for. And with data privacy, when using a generic email, when using generic email providers, charities don't have full control, organizations don't have full control over their email data. So depending on the provider, email content may be scanned for advertising or data mining purposes, increasing the risk of privacy violations or privacy violations and unauthorized access. And compliance issues, I'm sure this we've all come across this in one form or another, particularly over the past sort of nearly 10 years or so. So many industries have strict compliance requirements regarding data protection. Our favorite four letters in the UK, GDPR, is a part of that. Using generic email domains may not meet the necessary standards for encryption, data retention, or confidentiality, leading to potential legal and financial repercussions as well. So there's a few things there to be considering of the risks of using generic email domains. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there's a couple. So this is something I think can get often overlooked, which is something that charities do, all with like a good, well-meaning behind it, but can lead to potential problems. So company websites, charity websites, all in between, often have details of their employees or members. An attacker could use the information to then create an email address associated with an employee and pose as them. We found this particular trend happen with charities listed on the Charity Commission. Now that can be both for the UK, the England and Wales one, and also the Northern Ireland Charity Commission as well, we found. So the Charity Commission provides the details of charities' trustees. It's all publicly available there, meaning attackers will pose as these trustees to try and gain access to exclusive offers that are only available to charities. If you're anyone here today who's from a charity or works for a charity, there are certain offers that are out there. You may have heard, like, for example, Google for non-profits. That's a really, really famous one for helping for the various tasks you can do with Google Mail. Microsoft have offers as well for charities as well. So there are so these types of offers are very valuable to cyber criminals, and in many cases, when they do try and get access to this information using charity details, they'll try and sell it on in bad places, dark web, that kind of area. So yeah, like I said, once an attacker gains access to these details and they're able to even get validated or access offers that they shouldn't be, that belongs to the charity themselves, they'll most likely sell these details online. And yeah, from these images here, that's from my charity. So you can see that on the right is our Charity Commission page with the beginning list of the trustees. And from our main website on the left is, including my face there, is a list of employees as well, which is, it's all good to sort of, there's two sides of it. You really want to sort of personify who you work for in some occasions, just to really bring some trust to your audience, but at the same time, you also open up potential for mimicry. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's take a look at the main benefits of using a professional domain. So just to keep it brief as well. So there's a few, but we'll keep it to the point. So stronger security controls. So with a professional email domain, companies can enforce strict security protocols, such as using domain-based message authentication, reporting and conformance, which I mentioned a bit earlier, sender policy framework and domain keys identified mails, that DKIM, to prevent spoofing. There'll be also greater control. So with a professional domain, organizations have a full control over email configurations, including who can create accounts, monitor activity, and apply company-wide security policies. And trust, which is often overlooked, but a really big one. When emails come from a recognized domain like at companyname.com, they're less likely to be flagged as spam or phishing attempts by recipients. This builds trust and minimizes the risk of your emails being dismissed. Next slide, please. Thank you. So here are some of the best practices for the use of professional email domains and leverage the security benefits. So you want to enforce company-wide usage. So all employees should use the official email domain for business communications. Not just employees, but you may want to consider members. That could be your volunteers, your trustees. We tend to find a pattern there. It's the trustees that they have such an important role in organizations, but they won't have their own professional domain with an organization. We particularly in the charity sector, we tend to find that trustees are still using their own personal emails, and they tend to be Gmails, Hotmails, that kind of thing. Want to implement strong authentication, so touched on this very briefly earlier, so use two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication, and password managers if you need to go down that route for all accounts tied to your professional domain. You want to regularly monitor for suspicious activity, so you have the person who's looking after your IT, or if that is nominated to be you, you want to monitor traffic for signs of phishing attempts or unauthorized access. There's various software out there that can help you do that as well. Not just you're not on your own, there's software to help you do tracking for that. And also email encryption as well. So you want to, where you can, ensure all email traffic is encrypted, both at rest and in transit. I'm sure a lot of you already do that as well, particularly being in the care sector with the type of information that you hold. Next slide, please. Thank you. So just before I finish going on to the Q&A, I just wanted to share two of the potential attacks I receive on a regular basis. So they haven't happened, they're just potentials. So I very regularly receive emails from a person posing as my CEO, who is Jonathan Chevalier. So this cyber criminal has used his name, but is using generic email domains such as Gmail, Yahoo, others as well. And the story is always the same. The attacker is advising me of something that is urgent and that I need to respond to them. This particular attack leads on to the potential purchase of store gift cards. I know this because quite a few years ago, this style of email very nearly tricked one of my colleagues, no longer at the organization, but an old colleague. It nearly really tricked him with one of my employees into falling for this scam. I know that my CEO would not contact me via a separate generic email domain with such a strange urgent request. I also receive regularly, semi-regularly, but I also receive an email from a fraudster who is taking our own professional domain. So they've tried to spoof it and is attempting a spoofing attack by asking me to download some malware or something bad like that. This criminal is trying to pose as an IT person in my organization, trying to use our domain, but they're trying to click me on this suspicious link. But yeah, just wanted to give two stories out there that are quite frequent with myself. I think the main point from the two examples I've mentioned is communication between teams or employees is how important that is. In these examples, I've advised both my CEO of the fake emails I receive and also my IT lead of the potential spoofing attacks. I think it's important to be alert when receiving strange emails or requests from employees out of the blue. And this type of approach to email should be adopted by everyone in your group. The people we work with may not have such a keen eye for potential threats like this. So it's very important to bring examples like this to the attention of everyone. So it opens up everyone's eyes, hopefully. Next slide, please. Thank you. So yeah, in conclusion, while generic email domains might seem convenient, they open up significant cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Professional emails domains not only enhance your image and create trust, but also provide critical layers of security that protect your company from phishing attacks, impersonation, and data breaches. In an age where cyber threats are evolving, it's a simple but powerful step in safeguarding your organization. And yeah, that's me. Any questions, I guess?
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, put them on the Q&A or yeah, put them on the Q&A and I can take a look at them. But just while any of those come through, I wonder, Joel, is there kind of a better type of professional email domain? Like, is it better to have it shorter? Is it better to have like hyphens or not hyphens? Like, does that kind of then significantly continue to reduce your impact of being spammed as well?
I think if you can try and get the right registrar initially of the domain, which is a good point. So there's an organization called the Public Interest Registry, or PIR. So they hold a list of all sort of authenticated registrars for domains where you can safely purchase the domains that you want to use for your organization. And then, like I said, there's many domain types out there now, which it's not just .co.uk, .com, .org anymore. You've got .charity, .giving I've seen as well. There's many like that. So that would be your main starting point, I would say, with domains, is just making sure you get the correct registrar as well. obviously, maybe I wasn't clear on this because it's such a big topic to fit in such a small amount of time. But the domain, getting a professional domain itself doesn't mean that you're protected. There are other things that your organization or your group should have in place, such as cybersecurity software as well. If any, for example, if anywhere out there is using Microsoft, for example, with 365, there's something called Windows Defender, which is its basic level is an email protection tool as well. So it helps identify potential links. That's just an example. There's many different types of software out there as well, which will help you in terms of email domains. I think I'm going off on a tangent now. We're going into the big world of cybersecurity as well. But just to be clear that it's not just the domain itself. It's just, I think with the in terms of the cybersecurity thing is very important, but the trust as well, just with your audience and also the people, like perhaps when you're applying for grants or services. Yeah, I do think
Yeah.
that using more professional looking domain as well will have your grant perhaps perceived a little bit more, give you a bit more chance in a world where there's less grants and more applications.
Yeah, no, that's a good one with the grants, definitely. And would you say you then would also receive less spam as well? I know, like, I've got a Hotmail and a Gmail and obviously a work email. I get so much to my Hotmail that when I got married, I decided to set up a Gmail, and I do get a bit less to that one. I don't know whether I've just been stricter and I've not used it as much, but yeah, I wonder if it then continues with my work one. I don't get as much really at
Yeah,
all.
I mean, I guess the spam can happen from a number of different ways. I mean, in terms of your presence online, it's kind of like you create your own, I don't know, solar system is the way, but as you go into different websites and areas, you end up bringing these kind of different satellites of ads that follow you everywhere now, which could lead on to various forms of spam. I'm sure you're the same as me, but sometimes we're in an era now where we look at our phone and we think, has it just listened to what I was speaking about,
Yeah.
that kind of topic?
Yeah.
It's because of the more and more we use the web and go to different areas, we create our own, sort of solar sphere. I can't think of the word, but you have all these things
It's
following
the
you around.
algorithm and things, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
And the more of those that you have, potentially you have more spam coming into your inbox. Again, there's various tools to stop that, not just your domain, but you can get anti-spam software that's out there, some that's included with your typical cybersecurity software and things like that as well.
And I think it's probably worth saying as well, this came up in our conference yesterday, that don't forward on to the person that you've apparently had the spam from, and don't forward that email onto them, but just contact them with a separate email or on Teams or something like that, to make
Absolutely.
sure that, yeah.
Fully agreed. With the story time that I just said with regarding my CEO, I opened a human conversation with them about it rather than saying, "Hey, I forwarded an email saying I've got this. What is this you?" No, I've had a personal conversation where it's via Teams to say, "Hey, is this you?" Or, well, I knew it wasn't, but it was really just to let them know as well. So yeah, try to keep that. Try not to let teams become too siloed into just doing what you're doing. Still have our normal forms of communication outside of digital when you can.
Yes, definitely. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Joel. Right, we'll be moving on to Dan from Digital Care Hub, and there'll be having a chance to have questions for Dan at the end, and also Joel. So if anything comes through to your mind, pop it on the Q&A. I can keep an eye on it, and we'll bring it up again when we've finished with Dan.
Well, thanks, Eleanor. Yes, so I'm Dan. I'm the head of program delivery for Digital Care Hub's Better Security, Better Care program. Next slide, please. So the first thing that obviously comes to mind is, well, what's Digital Care Hub? So if you don't know by now, we're a partnership. We're run by broadly what's called the Care Provider Alliance. So you'll know a lot of the national trade associations in social care. Thinking off the top of my head, National Care Forum, Care England, VODG, and so on. There's 10 of those organisations, and we're a partnership project run by all 10 of them. So we're run by social care providers for social care providers. A couple of stats there. So over 10,000 organisations as members across the 10 trade associations. And really, pretty much all of our funding comes from the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England to be able to provide free support to the sector. Next slide, please. So what does Digital Care Hub do? So really, as it says on there, our key roles, really, we're here to support. Everything we do is free. We're here to really have several roles. The first one is around advice and guidance, to really pull out some of the key things that you guys ask us about, that we go and ask experts if we don't know the answer, and we come back and say, right, here's what you should know, here are the things you should have. If you're implementing digital technologies, how do you do it safely? How do you select the right types of digital technologies? Especially if you're going from paper to digital, or if you're looking to switch from one type of digital to another. We also spend quite a lot of our time actually feeding back into government, really care providers' interests. So you feed back to us and say, we're having these issues. These are the things we really want. This isn't available and we'd like it to be. These are the things that we feed back to government constantly. We also host the Better Security, Better Care programme. So it's, as it says, we believe that better security leads to better care. It's predominantly funded by NHS England and it's part of the Health and Social Care's Joint Cyber Unit. And it really focuses on data protection, cyber security. So as we're kind of thinking about digitising, how do we make sure we're not exposing ourselves to things that really we may not understand that we're even exposing ourselves to? And we'll go a little bit into that as we go through the webinar. And really, we also act as a bit of a subject matter expert to the Digitising Social Care programme, which is looking to roll out particularly digital social care records in adult social care. So if we think about how the plan at least is to begin to merge or be able to transfer data a little more easily between the health system and our system, we're trying to help them understand our side of things from social care. We also have endless amounts of advice, guidance, news, all over the website, and I'll probably say that too many times in this webinar, so I'll try not to labour the point here. Next slide, please. So really, one of the things we wanted to look at today was, if you are someone who's, let's say you've got your emails set up, you're moving over to a digital system, we really wanted to look at, okay, let's say a cyber attack happens. What are the most important things we should think about, both beforehand, because prevention's always better than the cure, but then a little bit later, we'll look at what do you actually do in that situation. And really, some of those things cross over quite nicely. So your business continuity plan, most of you will probably have some sort of business continuity plan in place. If we think about flooding, or if we think about fire, we probably have some sort of plan in place to be able to say, right, yes, if this happens, then this is our plan. Some providers, I think it's about half at the moment, tend to have more robust cyber security parts of their business continuity plan. And I know that might sound technical, but actually what you have to remember is you don't have to be an expert in cyber to put it into your business continuity plan, because you're the expert in your business and your organization. And we'll go through how you do that a little bit further in. And next slide, please. And next slide, please. Yeah, so we'll look at business continuity planning, both how you do it, why you should do it, and then we'll go through a few examples. So yeah, as I said, you probably already have one, but does it actually include cyber attack? Does it include what the consequences will be? And have you evaluated really what the impact of that might be? And a little bit later, we'll look at how you identify what the impact will be. Again, it might sound technical at this stage. It's really not. It's really just about looking at your business and figuring out, well, which systems are the most important ones, and if they go down, how badly does that impact us? Next slide, please. So to really try and distill this down, we've worked quite closely with the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England and a few other organisations, and they've customised what they call a data security and protection toolkit. Hopefully lots of you will be familiar with that already. I think about 70% of CQC registered providers use this toolkit. If you're not familiar with it, it's just a really good practice checklist. So it has 43 questions, which might sound like a lot, but actually lots of them are quite simple. To say, do you have this, do you have this, and do you have this in place? So if you're not really sure where to start, and you think, well, how do I get these things in place? This checklist is probably the first place that I would start. The other point to make is that CQC registered providers should be completing it. It can now be used as evidence, as it's now included in the CQC single assessment framework. we obviously know that CQC are in a difficult place at the minute, so that may depend on the particular inspector, but it isn't in the single assessment framework. If you look at well-led and look at governance, completing your toolkit you will be able to essentially say to the inspector, look, this should be able to evidence that we've got some good governance. And next slide, please. So really looking at our program and what do we do and how do we support? So as I said before, everything we do is free. It's all fully funded by the government. And really it is a national program, so it covers all of England. But it is also more focused as a local support program. So you'll see on the right-hand side there we have 28 local support organisations. Most of those are care associations. You will be members probably, or a large amount of you will be members of your local care association. We fund them to be able to do webinars, workshops, one-to-one sessions. If you ask them nicely, they'll probably come out to you and sit down with you and go through some of these questions and say, well, have you thought about this and what about this? They've really become, we've been going for about 3 years now, just over. And again, because we took people who are social care, and we've really upskilled ourselves in, okay, what are the things we need to know so that we can actually deliver good care? They are people who talk our language. They're the same as us. They work in the same sector. Many of them have been working in the sector for decades, but they understand what we should have in place. The program itself covers paper and digital records, so not just cybersecurity stuff, but actually, as Joel said before, our favorite 4 letters, GDPR. The toolkit can be used to evidence that we're actually complying with GDPR as well. And on top of that, obviously, we've got so many free resources. I did say earlier, I'll probably leave this point on and onward slides, but there really are an incredible number of free templates, resources, guides, videos. We've tried to put together as many things as we can, as many different accessible formats. So please do go on the Digital Care Hub website and just have a look through. Next slide, please. So this is an example of one of the things that's in the toolkit. So in the DSPT, the Data Security Protection Toolkit, one of these evidence items says, does your organization have a business continuity plan that covers data and cybersecurity? So the example it gives there is, if you had a power cut, your phone line goes down, your internet goes down, if you are hacked, a computer comes unavailable, do you have these in your business continuity plan? And that's all it really asks. It's not asking you to provide your business continuity plan. It's not asking you to go into extreme detail. It's just a checklist to say, have you thought about this and have you included this in your DSPT? Next slide, please. And this is probably one of the more important ones, and it's something that I'll probably label the point slightly on again, is really about testing your business continuity plan. So many times, and it happens with all policies, right? We write them, they go on a shelf, we don't get to test it, we revisit in a year or 2 years and we make sure it's applicable. But with something like a business continuity plan, because it quite literally your business's continuity depends on this plan working, it's incredibly important to, about every year, I would say annually, run a bit of a test. And we'll go into how you do that, but test some of those things. Does this plan actually survive contact with reality? Because it's all well and good having a bit of a checklist where we can say, yeah, we've got a business continuity plan, but does it work? And genuinely, as we'll see a little bit later, the survival of your organization could depend upon how well your business continuity plan can be implemented. And you can only get there through testing, really. Next slide, please. So looking at how do we actually look at our business continuity, and how do we do this? So how do you actually include it? It's all great me saying you should be thinking about these things, but how do I do that? And you'll see there's a template business continuity plan on the Digital Care Hub website. And this is really what we're looking at. So if we list this out, it's really quite simple way of thinking of this. What are the digital systems we have? And it might be worth asking both your office staff, some of your service coordinators, or whatever the role might be called in your organization, some of the people on the ground, which digital systems do you use on a day-to-day basis, and how severe would the impact be if this system went down? So we can all name, I'm sure, some of the obvious ones, if your record system went down, or, we've put some on the side, the payroll, your HR systems, how impactful would those be? But think about all of the different systems you use. And then importantly, what's an alternative? So if your email goes down, okay, fine, but you probably have an idea of the people that you're going to want to communicate with. You might have a separate system that you can log on to emails from, laptop, and so on. But what happens if your payroll goes down? What happens if your HR system goes down or your rostering system? What's your alternative there? Do you have a paper backup? And how often is that backup kind of created? Next slide, please. And we can do the same with devices. So we've looked at digital systems and we just ask, what's the impact? And really that's all we're after at this stage, is what is the proper impact of losing this or losing access to this system? And it's the same with devices, really. If it's staff mobile phones, if it's some of the office equipment that we use, list out as many of the devices as you can physically see and touch. What's the impact of that becoming either lost, stolen, broken, hacked? What kind of data is held on it? So what is the impact in that sense? And try and think outside the box in terms of, well, it might not give us access to this system, which might not be a big deal because we have backups, but maybe that device also holds quite sensitive service user data. And so that being lost or being hacked or being kind of stolen from us, if it's accessible and we can't wipe it remotely, you might go, oh, right, well, actually, that turns it from a 3 to a 7. In terms of reputational damage that could happen, in terms of potential fines from the Information Commissioner's Office and so on. I know that sounds a bit scary, but just thinking about some of the impact that the devices might have if we lose access to them. Next slide. Thank you. And then what we start to do is we take those two previous tables. So really all we've done is listed them out and looked at what's the severity of impact. And now if we look at those, we've recommended anything over a 5. Your risk profile might differ. But really you can then take those and just copy and paste them into a table and get rid of anything that isn't a 5 or above, or say a 6 or above, or whatever you might choose. And they're the ones that we look at and say, well, they're our critical systems. And I would honestly, very similar to how you might structure a risk register for your board, I would do the same sort of thing, list them in kind of order of severity. So maybe your 9 or your 10 out of 10 impact, those should be at your top, and you should be reviewing those to have a look at, okay, what do we have in place? Are these systems and these devices in our business continuity plan? Because if they go down, it could really harm us. And also have a think about, particularly with your critical systems, what's the length of time that system might go down for? So for example, losing access to our payroll for a day or 2, that wouldn't really cause that many issues for most organizations. But for a week or a month or 4 months, maybe if your supplier goes down from a cyber attack themselves, what do you have in place? How would your business continue through that problem? Is there a backup that you could find, or is there a way that you'd be able to have a big paper backup system, for example, in that scenario, or a separate system? I think that's it for that slide. Yep, next slide, please. So really we wanted to run you through some scenarios, really to bring some of this stuff to life and get you to think about what would we do in that situation, and if this happened, well, what is our plan? And we've listed a few of them there, but we'll go through them one by one. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So first scenario, this one, it might not sound like a sort of cyber digital problem, but let's say the power goes out in your main office. Let's assume you have a main office. How do you actually access all of the information and systems for your business? And it might be quite a simple answer. You might be able to say, well, actually, some of the staff work from home, or we have remote access to certain things, or we store it on the cloud. Brilliant. Note that down. And I think that's the important thing when we're doing some of this scenario, is actually writing some of this stuff down. It's really useful, and there's so much research behind when you're writing things down, actually it becomes quite ingrained in your brain. But also, once we've got these things written down, we can now use them as evidence for everything else. So our commissioner, CQC, or any of our partners start to ask, well, what would you do if this happened? We have an answer. It's written down. We've done this exercise, actually, and we've tested it. But this is one to think about. What would you do if the power went down? Next slide, please. And you can see we start to then look at different systems. So not just the power overall, but what would happen if the phone line or the internet went down? And I think the top bullet point is the main one to look at, is what systems would you lose access to? And it might not seem like an obvious answer at first. If, let's say, the main question I'd ask is, are you aware of which pieces of software require access to the internet? So even though you might still have your computer, well, does your rostering system require access to the internet? Does your invoicing system? What would you do if you lost access to the internet, but you can still access to those systems? What would be your backup in that scenario? As well as, if something goes down, for example, if your phone line's down, who are your main contact numbers? And again, I'd probably look at some of the most critical people and just make a physical backup of those and keep them somewhere so that these are the main people we need to contact. This is their mobile phone number or the telephone number. This is their email. And what you can even do, and I would probably recommend this particularly for your staff, is to let them know what the backup is, so that they don't just randomly receive a text message from someone that says, "Oh, hi, this is the main office. Our phones have gone down." That almost sounds like a scam to me. And I think, if your staff are trained well, they'd probably feel the same. Whereas if they know, oh, this is the backup number that the office is always going to send things from, brilliant. Now we've established what our backup is. Our staff are aware. We're aware. We can activate the business continuity plan if anything happens. And we're not going to run into any problems. And you would pick some of that stuff up when you test it as well. Next slide, please. And the same sort of scenario for whatever device is lost or stolen. And there's some of the obvious questions around, well, do you have a backup device? If, let's say you use tablets in your organization to record some data. Okay, but sure, you have backup tablets, or you might be able to share a device between people for very temporarily. If the data there is lost, well, is it stored on the cloud or is it stored on that device? Can you just easily back it up? And then importantly, looking at, well, if this data gets out there, if it's stolen, for example, and someone can access this, what does that mean in terms of A, your reputational damage, B, the danger to potential service users, but also the danger to any part of your organization? If it's a tablet, for example, I'm just using tablets in this scenario, that your finance director uses, well, do they store all of the finance information on there as well? What happens if someone gets their hands on that? And the thing I would think about mainly is, well, how do we counter that problem? So you might say there's software available that allows you to remotely wipe devices. Fantastic. Let's just make sure it's on all of the devices. So if we lose them, we can remotely wipe them. That sort of thing that you can look at. And we'll go into some of that in a little bit. But just thinking through some of those problems, have a little look around and just come up with some ideas for, oh, right, yeah, what would we do if we lost access to that device? Next slide, please. And then obviously the worst case scenario for anyone really is, what happens if you were hacked? I'm actually going to take this in reverse order than it is on the slide, but obviously in the event of an attack, contact the police. We've put a link to Action Fraud in there, which is the sort of police cybercrime line. And really importantly, and I really want to stress this one, is report it, both to the police, but also you might have an obligation with the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office. You might actually have an obligation with CQC if it interferes with frontline care. There are certain scenarios where you have to report that sort of thing to CQC. You may have to report it to your commissioner if you're commissioned by a local authority, and so on and so forth. The really important thing here is not to feel embarrassed, not to feel ashamed. The way I try and frame it for people now is, if you went outside and somebody decided to mug you in the street, let's touch wood, that never happens, but let's say somebody did, you wouldn't feel ashamed. You wouldn't feel like, oh, well, I've done something wrong. But somehow when it becomes a cyber crime, we feel ashamed. We feel a bit, oh, I must have done something wrong. I didn't have all my ducks in a row. Well, no, actually, you've been a victim of a cyber crime. This is a criminal who's attacked you. You wouldn't, if somebody broke into your house, you wouldn't somehow feel really ashamed and feel like a terrible person. But we tend to when it comes to cybercrime, and actually that's why I think most crime now is cybercrime, and it doesn't get reported. It does go underreported, so definitely make sure you do report it. Some of the obvious stuff, but it's always worth saying is change your passwords, find the right technical support. That could be your IT supplier, it could be the actual supplier that you use for that particular piece of software that's gone down. And again, contact the police. They're always there to help as well. And then once you've managed to say, okay, we're no longer infected or the cyber attack is over, let's try and restore backups. And let's, in the meantime, let's try and keep a paper record or a backup record somewhere so that we can eventually merge those things in. And the things we can do really, and I said before, we all know it's true, the prevention is better than a cure. The main three things we try and pull out is keep your systems updated. I know it's horrible. I know it's annoying when you get the pop-up that says this software needs updating. Just click update. Honestly, it's the best thing you can do. In 99% of cases, the most updated piece of software is going to be the most secure. Look at what types of antivirus you have in place. As Joel said before, the things like Windows Defender that can make sure that the vast majority of malicious software isn't going to be able to take a hold in your system. And really make sure that, and this is probably the most critical one, make sure that you've trained your staff. Like most organizations, you're only as weak as your weakest link. And unfortunately, we as humans are the weakest link in this chain. It's nothing to do with, digital competency. I've seen people who are extremely digitally competent fall prey to cybercrime, and I've seen people who are really not very digitally savvy also be in the same scenario. It's got nothing to do with any of those things. It's just to make sure you're aware of, here's what we should be doing, here's what we shouldn't be doing. And it is usually the human factor that makes the difference. Next slide, please. The other scenario to consider really is we've talked about, well, what if you were hacked? But what if one of your suppliers has a fault? And this is actually one of the more common scenarios at the moment, especially between both care and health. Lots of these malicious actors, and we're particularly thinking about everyone from your kind of kid in a bedroom who's just trying to cause some damage and make some money, all the way up to your Russias of the world. They've realized that actually the most damage they can do is target a supplier. If they target your nursing home or your dom care service, that's one service that may have to pay them up. But if they target a supplier, that's potentially 50, 100, 1,000 organizations they're now going to suffer. So both in terms of harm, but also in terms of, well, all of those 1,000 organizations are paying fee to the supplier, and so they can start to try and squeeze the supplier for money, who obviously wants to avoid the reputational damage and so on. So think about, especially when we've looked at the criticality of our systems, so what's the biggest impact? Look at those systems that are the highest score and ones and say, right, well, if it was out for a week, what would happen? If they was out for a month, or, I mean, we've seen some systems go out for 4, 5, 6 months. What would we do in that scenario? Do we have a process to be able to quickly get something else in place? And it's worth having the conversation, I think, with your supplier to ask them what would happen in this scenario. Who do you have? Who's your contact person? How would you inform us if you had a cyber attack as a customer? What sort of trust can we have? What sort of backups do you have? How quickly might things come back online? Obviously, they don't have a crystal ball. They can't know every scenario, but it's worth interrogating your suppliers just on the off chance, especially because this is one of the more common attacks that we're seeing at the moment. And next slide, please. So thinking, if we've got some of those scenarios in place, what we've then done, again, this is all part of the business continuity plan template, is really say, okay, well, thinking of some of these scenarios, what would we do? If the power went out, or if we had a hack, or if one of our suppliers was hacked, and you could probably pick some of your key suppliers and some of your key digital systems to base those scenarios around, and say, well, okay, what could happen? And this is an important part: is it happen? If it does happen, who needs to do what and by when? So creating an owner for this. Who is the person that is responsible for this? That's really important, both from a leadership point of view of you able to say, well, I'm the one that takes charge in this situation, but both from your staff's point of view, because then they know, it's this particular person that's going to be the lead when this thing happens. But it's really important in your business continuity plan to avoid that chaos if you know it's this particular person. As well as who need to be told. So we talked about things like critical contacts that you might want to list down. And then what needs to be put in place. And you'll see the bottom line is date last tested. And we'll go into that in a second. But those two parts work together quite well, because you'll test it and then you know actually what needs to be put in place for this to work and not just be a document on the wall. Next slide, please. So thinking about how we make our plans work, the main ones I really want to pull out of this are making sure your staff are aware of the plan. So we talked before about, if you do have a backup phone system, for example, let your staff know that. God, I can only imagine how difficult it must be if your staff find out there's been a cyber attack and then they receive some strange text messages from a number that's never contacted them before. Make them aware of these things. If there's a backup email system, make them aware of it. If they might receive the pay through a backup system that you've got in the background, make them aware of that too. And the final two really are so important. It's test. We'll go into that in a second, but it really is so important to at least once a year just test some of this stuff. It doesn't have to be extremely detailed, but putting something into practice is always better than nothing. Next slide, please. So really looking at how might you test these things. So if the office was if we want to test what would happen when the office was unavailable, lock the door, simulate it becoming unavailable, do it for an afternoon. Okay, let your staff know that it's going to happen so they don't panic. But just see what happens, then go through the steps and say, right, okay, this person should be doing this. The business continuity plan should have activated and these steps should have been taken. And then afterwards, do a little, relatively quick lessons learned exercise of, well, this didn't work because of X, Y, and Z, and here's how we can change the plan. And you can do the same with your phone line. You could do the same with the broadband failure. And yeah, there's so many different ways to be able to test these things. Next slide, please. Yeah, I knew there was a few more. Yeah, so they've given an example of broken laptop, but you can do it with any device. And again, I would pick some of those high-scoring devices and those high-scoring suppliers and say, right, let's switch those off for an hour or two. Right, don't put any of your work off. Let's see what would actually happen in that scenario. Let's follow the plan so it's not chaos. And let's see where we get to. And you'll probably find that the plan sounded good, but you run into a few problems that you need to actually adapt the plan to compensate for. The final one is sometimes a bit technical. It depends on the type of organization you are, the size of the organization, the resource you've got access to. But simulating something like a phishing attack, you can outsource that sort of thing. There are ways and pieces of software you can use to essentially send a mass email to all of your staff and say, it might look like a very slightly different email from you, just asking for some specific details, and just see what comes back in that sense. I think that's it on the test and the business continuity plan, but I really can't emphasize enough, please do test it. Next slide, please. And the other important part is recording the test. So both from your point of view, you can then know, because we're testing this once a year or so, you can go back and take a look. Again, this is all part of the business continuity plan template. Really important as well is because we've recorded this, we can now start to use this for evidence. And I know the first thing that comes to mind when you think about evidence is probably the CQC. And yes, this would be a good piece of evidence to show them amongst everything else you'll probably send them. But think about this from a business point of view as well. If you're a mortgage broker, for example, who's looking to sell insurance that might include cyber insurance to your organization or to a bunch of care organizations, and you come forward and say, well, actually, we have a business continuity plan. It covers cyber security, and here's the past 3 years where we've tested this, and here's how we've adapted the plans. Does that not give us some sort of negotiation or some sort of ability to at least bring down our fees for insurance, for example? Think of how it might benefit you in different ways. It's going to be the same with commissioners over time. I think local authorities are starting to realize that cyber attacks are massively impactful. Local authorities themselves have been hit with quite a few cyber attacks recently. There was if you want to Google one, there was a really horrible one in Leicester, which took down all of their finance systems. It has a massive impact on the adult social care providers well, not all of them, but lots of them in Leicester. So really being able to come forward to your commission and say, well, actually, here's the assurance we've done. It's really quite valuable, and that can be the difference in the little differences in being able to be a bid for a contract or not. Next slide, please. So a little bit about some of the further guidance. So obviously, as I've said on the Digital Care Hub website, there's just endless amounts of resources. We've put the link in there, and you'll get the slides to be able to create and test your business continuity plan, and particularly around cybersecurity. But actually, those lessons are applicable to almost everything you would have in your business continuity plan anyway. And yeah, to labour the point a bit further on staff training, it really is the most important thing you can do. And if you sit and think, well, okay, well, how do I do that staff training? Do I do it? How do I, how do I access the right resources? Well, that was one of the gaps we found as a program, was actually we created a piece of e-learning specific to adult social care because there wasn't anything else out there. And again, it's completely free. It's available on the Digital Care Hub website. You can either send it to the link to your staff to be able to do it. And I would also recommend, if you've got directors, trustees, and so on, I'd recommend all of them and your senior leadership team do it as well. Or we will have a separate managers one coming out over the next few months. You can do it on the website and you'll be able to get a certificate. Or if you're someone who uses a sort of learning management system that you've purchased in for your staff, contact us via our helpline and you'll be able to download basically the files for it that you then import into the learning management system itself. So it sits nicely within your learning management system. And then the final link we put on there is just about the different types of scams. It's a bit of an A to Z of the different fraud that's out there. Some of it is, I hesitate to call it innovative, but it's surprising actually the different ways that some of these cyber criminals are doing things. So sometimes it's worth just skimming through, particularly maybe in your annual test of your business continuity plan to say, right, is there anything that stands out here that we've seen? I'm sure we've seen lots of them in there, the post office text messages that get sent out and so on. But it's a really interesting list to click through. Next slide, please. The other thing we do have on the website is just massive amounts of recorded webinars similar to this one. Not all of them are on business continuity. There are some other topics. There are lots of other topics, actually. So please do have a click through them. We do, I think in a couple of weeks, we're doing one that's going to do a bit of a deep dive on your policies and procedures, particularly in relation to your data protection. So if you're interested in that, please take a look on the website. You'll be able to see, if you go to About and then Events, you'll be able to see all of our events listed. But on the website, we have all of the recordings. So if you miss one, it's not a problem. The recording will be on there usually. Next slide, please. And the final things I'd probably say is as some actions to take away are, if you're not sure where to start, contact your local support organisation. So they're the care associations, the 28 we spoke about much earlier in the webinar. Really, those are the guys who are on the ground, there to help, fully funded to support you guys. And then do use the Digital Care Hub website outside of that to access all of the guidance, the templates is probably the other thing I should point out. We have so many template resources for all of the different policies and procedures you might need. Yeah, I think just make sure you access it. Next slide, please. And the other thing is, because we are a collaborative, so we're for social care providers by social care providers, first thing to do is sign up to our newsletter. The comms team will kill me if I don't say that enough times. Really, there's lots of stuff around digital, around data protection, around how to adopt digital systems, what systems are out there. There's our Digital Care Hub special interest group. So you don't have to be a digital expert to join it. Actually, it's probably much better if you're someone who's interested in digital or is trying to adopt digital. And that's the group I was saying earlier. We take lots of views from that group and we take them back to government and we take them back to NHS England. We take them back to the Department of Health and say, right, here's a broad mix of adult social care providers who are in and around digital at different stages of the digital journey. Here's what they're saying to us, and that really does help inform policy. We've got a really strong network of providers in there. And there's a new one that we've just launched. If you're aware of what a Caldecott Guardian is, it's sort of like a role or a hat that you might wear. Very similar to your sort of data protection officer role, except this one is more interested in the ethics of how we use the data we have, whereas the data protection officer is more interested in, is this legal or not? There's about 12,000 Caldecott Guardian, or people who have the Caldecott Guardian role in their day-to-day work and life. And so we've started up a bit of a sort of interest group for them over a network. There is one for kind of more broadly nationally, but it's quite health focused at the moment. The two may merge eventually, but we thought social care really needs a bit of a space for this. So if you are interested in that, or you're even just interested in what a Caldecott Guardian might be and how to become one, please drop us an email about that. Next slide, please. And that was it, I think. Thank you very much. Shall I pass back to you, Eleanor?
Yes, thank you, Dan, very much. Very informative. We've just got a couple of questions that come through. That might be for both of you, to be fair. So we've got one around mobile and the MFA. What does it stand for again? The multi something like that, authentication. I can't even say that word. It's a mouthful.
Multi-factor authentication.
Yeah. You know what I meant. That's good. Yeah, so it's all around that basically. So saying that business continuity is making alternative plans should we have a cyber attack or physical attack. So how do we keep a mobile phone for the MFA? I think is the query. I guess it's if I think, and do correct me if I'm wrong who asked this question, but it's if the phone moves around between different people, like how is it best to manage that if you need to have an MFA? You got any feedback on that one?
Yeah, God, I think that's quite difficult, and it is something we struggle with in social care. There's a lot of we shouldn't really do it, but we do share a lot of devices. I mean, the main thing to think about is what I would do is evaluate from your business point of view. Okay, what's the risk? If we're sharing devices and we're all accessing the same devices, that in a way it does disallow things like multi-factor authentication, which is something that, God, it makes it so much more secure. And thinking about stuff like multi-factor authentication, I mean, we have it for things like our banking apps. You open up your banking app to access your money, you've got to, I don't know, receive a text message that has a number on or whatever it might be. And that's the only reason for that is security. So if we're thinking about all of the important data we hold on service users, should we not be taking the same steps to make sure that's the case? I know that does mean the unfortunate step of saying, well, we probably need to have more devices, but that's the necessity of the world we work in at the moment.
Joel, have you got anything to add?
No, I mean, thank you, Dan. I think from a business continuity, you actually did that well. Yeah, in terms of two-factor or multi-factor authentication itself, you just want to work alongside the right organizations that can implement it as well. I'm trying not to be too Microsoft heavy, as I can talk about others. There are other sort of cybersecurity providers, but there's something called Intune, which is pretty much it is a standard by a lot of organizations now. Intune, to keep it simple, it's included if you're taking advantage of anything like Microsoft 365 Business Premium or anything like that, it's included. That type of that it's included with that license. So if your users are using that sort of level software, then it's included, or you can purchase it separately as its own sort of license via Microsoft. Hopefully you can get it at a non-profit rate. The non-profit rates are massively discounted. But to be honest, the restriction with Microsoft in this country is in the UK we like to do things differently, as in the fact that we have both non-profits and charities. And what Microsoft mean by non-profits in the UK is that they actually mean charities in the UK. So that kind of offer, those discounts are only available to charities in that sense. But hopefully there's some maneuverability in your budgets if you have that, to get that sort of a form of multi-factor authentication in your organization, particularly when using mobile phones, is probably what I would say more than the industry standards.
Brilliant, thank you. And a couple of questions just came through in the Q&A. So somebody just asked about cybersecurity software and what was it? So I just mentioned that it was a software that aims to stop sophisticated cyber attacks. Modern cybersecurity software often contains multi-layers of security tools, including machine learning and cybersecurity AI solutions, to continuously build greater protection as new cyber threats arrive. And they've just followed up with, thanks, and where do I buy it from? Is it like antivirus, like Norton?
Yeah, I was looking at the one that covered a couple of areas, because it may have come through to do with domains as well. I've got a link. I'm just going to put that in chat. That's for the public interest registry for the domains side of thing that I spoke about earlier. That's where you can look up domains for your organization. They're the organization who created .org, by the way. So I've just put that in chat. But in terms of where you can buy it from, there's lots of different versions of on the other side, there's a lot of different various cybersecurity software out there. You mentioned one of them. Norton is one. You've got Avast, Bitdefender, McAfee, you know, some stuff that we take for granted that's maybe included when we first buy a device that comes automatically, that it's there as well. We mentioned Windows Defender is another form as well. There's so many different ones out there, Acronis. The list is long out there, and you just want to make sure that yeah, you cover as many areas as possible with your with cybersecurity software, as some specialize in some areas that others don't. For example, I mentioned Windows Defender earlier. I don't want to call it an entry level, but the standard version that people tend to get easy access to is primary strength, should I say, is with email protection. But the standard version of it wouldn't be called what they call an endpoint protection. So if something were to happen to the device directly, it's been attacked, then you'd either need to upgrade it to an endpoint version, or you don't have to stay loyal to software or anything out there. You know, question it, see what the best is out there, and you might want to mix and match something like Windows Defender with, like I mentioned, Norton or Avast or Bitdefender for your endpoint protection as well. But there's lots out there. There's discounts available if you have any sort of charitable status. And for anything from my organization, for when we try to help as many people as possible, despite all the restrictions out there, is that if you're a non-profit organization, just do the old famous version of, you know, how much for cash, but the non-profit version, I like to call it, which is do you have a non-profit offer? As many organizations out there providing software and services don't actively advertise non-profit offers. So sometimes it's worth approaching, do you have a non-profit offer?
Yeah, worth asking, definitely. Brilliant, thank you. And final question is, are there any available template cyber response playbooks available aimed at social care, etc., e.g. phishing email, ransomware attack, etc.?
Yes, so interestingly, that's something we'll be launching this month as part of Cyber Awareness Month. So there's a bit of a campaign that we'll have, and you'll be able to see the resource on the website pretty soon, which is starting off with how do you identify a cyber attack, and then what might you want to do in the middle of a cyber attack, i.e. how do you respond as a bit of a playbook. It's quite difficult to write one for the entirety of social care, because obviously we've got so many different types of service. Your nursing home may not have even the same sort of structure as a domiciliary care business, and that's before we even look at the size of organizations. But we've tried to get as much as we can in terms of tailoring it to social care as possible. But you will see that over the next couple of weeks.
Brilliant. So keep an eye on our website and our socials, and I guess Charity Digital socials as well. We'll always be updating you on resources and events coming up. So yeah, check out both of those. I don't know if there's any more questions coming through. There's no more at the moment. But I'd like to take the opportunity to thank both Dan and Joel for joining us today, for delivering our email domains and our business continuity. Lots of resources and information. I appreciate quite heavy, but you will have access to recording. It will go on our website. Yeah, you'll be able to kind of review it and when you need to then. But if you've got any questions in the meantime, please do pop us an email at hello@Digital Care Hub, and we can kind of pass you to either Joel or one of our team to come back to you. Unless there's any other questions, I'll give you back 15 minutes of your day. And thank you very much for joining us today.
I just wanted to say as well what Dan came up with today, which my take home is prevention is better than the cure. I think that's I'm glad you came back to that quote, because I thought when you first said it, I went, oh, I like that. And yeah, I think that's a really good quote to take away from today. So thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Joel.
Yeah, that's a good shout, Joel. I think everyone thinks it won't happen to them. And I've said this to people when I've explained what I do, and they're like, yeah, that's true actually. So I think it could happen to you quite easily now.
You're so true. I mean, particularly with charities, they may think they're too small or that kind of thing, but with cyber criminals, as spoken to about Dan, it can be someone who just wants to be a troll, like a student testing out their skills. Yeah, Dan alluded to that. So yeah, prevention is better than the cure. That's the one for sure.
That should be our strap line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Oh, I forgot to put this on. Yeah, I can just pop it in while we still got everyone. Hopefully, haven't gone. Just to mention as well, just while we've got you all, that a chance that there's still access to funding for your digital social care records. We thought of just getting it out there because it's quite tight on time. The clock is ticking campaign that the digitizing social care team was setting up. So yeah, do access that if you want to access the social care records funding. I think that might be it. Do you want to just check the next slide? Perfect. And I'll leave you with all those details. Do let us know if you have any questions, and thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.